Good morning, and welcome to the Unitarian Universalist congregation of Flint. We have been providing a liberal religious presence in this area for 90 years, and we're eagerly planning for many more. While we don't expect people to adhere to a particular dogma, we do have principles we try to abide by. You may find those on our website, uuflint.org. In the past, there was a grouping of 3 words found in our association, which we use less often now, but which I find still helpful. Even in Unitarian circles, there was a trinity. They are freedom, reason, and tolerance. I think they may still give an idea of what guides us: freedom, reason, and tolerance. Our Saturday open-air, pandemic-approved noon meetings are well attended and a lot of fun. All of our remaining meetings will take place here on our beautiful grounds, and our robocalls and the e-updates will provide any new details. Just remember to bring a chair and a lunch if you like. We are grateful for the gifts of time, talent, and treasure that support our congregation. We will gratefully accept your online offering through our website, www.uucf, to help continue our presence as an open and accepting liberal faith community. Offerings can also be mailed to the church address. Remember to click like on our Facebook posts, as this will help more people find their way to our services and our congregation. Our service today includes some readings and descriptions of Native American customs and beliefs. We do this to honor the wisdom of those words and traditions, but we also realize we can't fully know the experiences of Native Americans that helped shape their traditions. We are, therefore, not pretending to be Native Americans, and we hope the attention we give to the original inhabitants of this continent and their descendants will be understood as a sign of respect. And now we will begin our service with a prelude played by Jennifer Howard. These words are from Orlando Brugnola. Flame, friend of our most ancient ancestors, we kindle you now to make you visible in this time. yet in truth you burn always, in the unique worth of each person, in the imagination, in the turning of the heart to sorrow or joy, in the call to hope, and in the call to justice. Burn bright within us. Burn bright within us. Please join me in reciting our covenant, recognizing the richness of diversity, the beauty and wonder of shared worship, and the transforming power of love and service. We gather as a sacred, intentional community to freely seek knowledge and truth, to celebrate the fullness of life, and by our actions to increase goodness and justice.
Good morning. O our Mother, the earth, O our Father, the sky, your children are we, and we have tired backs, but we bring you the gifts you love. Then weave for us a garment of brightness. May the warp be the white light of morning. May the weft be the red light of evening. May the fringes be the falling rain. May the border be the standing rainbow. Thus, weave for us a garment of brightness, that we may fittingly walk with the birds and where they sing, that we may walk fittingly where the grass is green. O our Mother, the earth, O our Father, the sky.
Our meditation words are those of a Shawnee creation story, as told by Methodist minister and Shawnee storyteller Neake, also known as the Reverend Fred Shaw. When God created the world, God thought the world into being. But God said, "There is nothing of me in pure thought." So, God took out God's own heart and broke it into 4 pieces and tossed it to the 4 winds. Every place where a piece of God's heart fell, people came into being. God told the people that they were to learn from the place from which they had come and from each other. And when they had learned the wisdom of that place, and of their sisters and brothers, God would gather all of the people from the 4 winds. They would share their collective wisdom in community, and God's heart would be restored.
We're going to try and make sure we get the audio to you. We may have to try this again, or perhaps we can't get the audio, and if we can't, I'll let you know what Reverend Fred Shaw Nyake is saying during my reflection. We'll give it one more try here. Thanks anyhow, Thorpe and David. Let's go ahead and begin with the reflection, and I'll let you know what was in that video, and we'll try and get it to you at some other service. In 1911, two men, each leading a small expedition, were racing to be the first to get to the South Pole for the glory of their own country. One of them was an English military man who was intent on doing it the English way. His men dressed in good English wool, which does not breathe well, by the way, so the sweat of their bodies froze to their skin, making them miserable. The Englishmen used Siberian ponies to pull their sleds, but the ponies were ill-suited for the weather, and they didn't test them out to begin with in the Antarctic weather, and the ponies soon died thereafter, suffering terribly. The men also suffered terribly because they each pulled their own sled of provisions using the English military tradition known as man-hauling. The leader of this group, Robert Falcone Scott, was an autocrat. He made all the final decisions himself. He refused to listen to the suggestions of his men, and he ran the expedition as though it was a war. Scott insisted the navigator had to be an officer, even though the officers had no training in navigation. His men of lower rank had been trained in navigation, but they were not even allowed to touch the sextant or the compass. One of his men would later say of Scott's leadership, "Our party is divided, and we are like an army that is defeated, disappointed, inconsolable." The other leader, racing for the pole with his team, was Roald Amundsen, and Roald and his men were all Norwegian. And they chose to wear coats like those worn for thousands of years by the natives of the Arctic, the Inuit. It was a loose-fitting coat of caribou hide that kept you warm, but it also breathed. This group of men used dogs to pull their sleds, just as the Inuits had done since time immemorial. Dogs perspire through their tongues by panting, not through their skin like humans and those Siberian ponies, and this makes them perfectly suited for working hard in frigid temperatures. The Norwegians also used skis and had the aboriginals of Scandinavia for some 8,000 years. And the group made most of their decisions by consensus. Amundsen was not worried about having total control of this effort, and he let his carefully chosen experts help in the decision-making. This created a happy, dedicated group of hardworking men, and we don't know if Amundsen learned his non-hierarchical leadership style from the native peoples who also practice it. We don't know if he learned it from them or if he just had the common sense to know that an autocracy is a dangerous thing. In any case, his group reached the South Pole first, 5 weeks before the English expedition, and they started at about exactly the same time. Scott and his fellow Englishmen finally made it to the pole, but all 5 of them died on the return trip, while Amundsen and his men skied back to the safety of the ship with energy to spare. This is not a sermon about learning the cool outdoor wisdom of the so-called Indians so you can survive in the wilderness. Of course, that is what Roald Amundsen did, and it served him very well. But instead, I'd like to talk about why so many human beings are so slow, so reticent to learn anything from other cultures. The book that describes this race to the South Pole is entitled The Last Place on Earth. And we read it at the UU Star King School for the Ministry to study leadership styles. The book shows clearly that no matter what kind of expedition you are on, be it keeping a church going and happy, or trekking to the South Pole, or perhaps even governing a nation, you need to do the following. You need to have many leaders in your group. You need to honor them all, and you need to swallow your national, ethnic, personal pride and learn from other people. It occurs to me, racism is not one of the 7 deadly sins mentioned in the Bible. But pride, racism's friend, is mentioned many times. Foolish, irrational, hate-filled pride makes people say, my race, my country, my ideas are better than any others. Amundsen lived with the Inuit people, became friends with them, and said he liked them better than his fellow Norwegians. Amundsen had gone native, as his fellow Englishmen would say derisively, of someone who stopped being a proud Englishman. Stopped being a proud Englishman, that is, when among foreign people that they were supposed to dominate. Scott would not go native, and thought wearing a coat made of animal skin would make him look uncivilized. It was his pride, among other things, that killed him and his men. The video that we tried to play this morning was a video of Nyake, the Methodist minister, also a member of the Shawnee Remnant Band. And he spoke of how the land does not belong to us. We belong to the land. That he grew up in west central Ohio, just south, a few miles south of where I grew up. He was down near Urbana, Ohio. And in the video, he said that, he grew up under the maple trees. He grew up in the eastern woodlands, and that it was in his DNA, and that for him to move someplace far away would not be good for him. It was not good for his fellow Native Americans to be displaced as they were in the many centuries when the Europeans settled this place and took much of the land from the Native Americans. The land does not belong to us. We belong to the land. That belief is, of course, the exact opposite of the beliefs that drove European Americans to take land from the Native Americans. Nyake, or as he is known in the Methodist Church, the Reverend Fred Shaw, a member of the Eastern United Remnant Band of the Shawnee Nation, and who through his family lineage inherited the honorable and historic position of the tribal storyteller. I first met him in 1989, and his stories from the ancient Shawnee tradition helped me find my way in life, and also helped keep me going back when I was trying to become a Methodist minister. I remember it so well. I remember it so well that to this day I could probably walk to the very chair where I was sitting in old Hoover Auditorium on the shore of Lake Erie. I was with hundreds of other Methodists during the annual West Ohio Conference meeting. The proceedings of the General Assembly that day were pretty boring, as is often the case with any church conference. But then the next presenter, a guy in historic Native American garb, took to the stage. It was Fred Shaw, Nyake. A fully ordained Methodist minister, but what he did was not part of any Methodist liturgy I had ever seen. He stood there, performing his stories as though we were the people of his tribe, and he, as the honored storyteller, had center stage. He used all the gestures and body language a good story would have used centuries ago. Excuse me. Niake told the story of the Shawnee hunter who cradled the head of the deer he had just killed. And he said, "Thank you for the gift of life, your brother. Know that we will not waste you. From your antlers, I will make a handle for my new knife. From your skin, I will make a new dress for my wife. She will be lovely in it. From your thigh bone, I will make a flute for my boy. He plays very good. And I'll even use your toe bones in a rattle for my baby girl. She laughs very good. I will not waste you, brother, and when I die, I will go into the ground and become food for the trees and plants that your children will feast upon, because life gives to life. Life gives to life." He told other stories that day, creation stories, that just in the telling of them made it clear that the Bible's creation story was just one more perfectly good story. It was the juxtaposition, Native American spirituality placed side by side with Christians who thought they had the final civilized truth. His stories were full of universal wisdom, and I remember looking around in dismay when he was given only a smattering of applause. Now, I know I was expecting too much. I wanted everyone there to stand up and say, "Oh my God, those Native Americans have a beautiful spirituality, and we should stop saying that Christianity is the only worthwhile religion. And we should be sorry that we took their land with the justification that they were just unsaved savages." No one said those things, of course, at least not on that day. And in fact, the leaders of the Methodist Church and other denominations as well had already decided they were losing members because their churches had become too liberal. Methodist seminaries, such as the one I attended, started hiring very conservative Christians to replace the liberal scholars who had taught there for many years. They had taught that Christianity was strong enough to survive rational debate, and that it was just one more good religion. Think of the irony in the irrational, pride-filled idea that Christianity is the one true religion, when the very Bible Christians use contains multiple warnings about the deadliest of sins, pride. The land does not belong to you. You belong to the land. I remember when Lynn and I first moved to Massachusetts in 1997. I was so anxious to get to the rocky shore of the Atlantic Ocean and wade in it and just glory in its vastness, just as we had in the Pacific Ocean when we lived in California. So we packed up the car and drove north up the coast to find a beach. We were so ignorant. All we found was private property and mean signs that warned us to stay off the beach. Many of the small towns had beaches, but they were for their residents only, and more threatening signs told us of all the bad things that would happen to us out-of-towners if we tried to use the parking lot, let alone the beach. Lynn and I were incredulous, and yes, ignorant at that time. Ignorant that in many places in America, access to the ocean belongs to people who can afford to buy a piece of the shore. We later found the beach, Crane Beach, created by the trustees of reservations, an organization that believes the forests, the lakes, the beaches belong to everyone, not just to those who can afford to buy them. Of course, Crane Beach is so rare that on a weekend, you have to buy a ticket to get onto it, or otherwise it would be elbow to elbow with people. And all because the rest of the shoreline is privately owned. In her award-winning book, An Indigenous People's History of the United States, Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz explains that the property of Native Americans was held collectively. The original inhabitants of this continent had an indigenous collective socialism, developed over thousands of years, and it served them well. This ancient way of being was, of course, a problem for white Americans who wanted to buy up more reservation land. So then, in 1887, a Senator Dawes said that the socialism of Native Americans made them lazy. He actually argued that selfishness is the driving force behind civilization. So Senator Dawes created and passed the Dawes Act that split up reservations into allotments and mandated that Native people buy their own piece of land. This broke up the socialistic reservations that Senator Dawes hated so much, and it led to the Oklahoma land rush of 1889. 50,000 white settlers poured onto that land that was once the communal property of the Seminole and the Creek. Today, school children in Oklahoma are given what is supposed to be a joyful history lesson when they reenact that Oklahoma land rush. The Native American residents are left to stand there and watch and to say, and what about us? And those school children, we know very well their textbooks don't present socialism as an historic, successful, unselfish way to run your tribe, your community, or your country. In fact, most textbooks today still treat socialism as a slightly less bad form of communism. Some of you may remember an old BBC series known as Sir Kenneth Clarke's Civilization. That's civilization with an S, not a Z. If you're not old enough to remember it, that's okay, because I can describe it very well. It was 1969, and Lord Clarke, a Scottish art historian, sought to define and show what is meant by the word civilization. In the 13-hour program, he told the millions of people who watched it that to be a true civilization, meaning that which is above and better than people who aren't civilized, to have a true civilization, you first have to have durable buildings and a written form of communication. He said a true civilization also produces enduring art. In other words, art made of stone. He especially liked the artwork produced by the Christian culture of Europe, such as that of Michelangelo and Raphael. He had very little time for Islam and for faith systems like Judaism that he said did not produce great art or architecture. In other words, his definition of civilization continued the old, white, European Christian ideas that what is good and worth keeping and what shows progress is having technology, the technology produced by white European Christians. In this view, genocides, world wars, environmental degradation, those things are seen as accidental backsliding, not an integral problem with the civilization itself. Many people nowadays watch Kenneth Clark's Civilization and shake their heads at its white Eurocentrism. In that proud myth, the myth of civilized European superiority that keeps many Americans from seeing the wisdom of the original people of our continent. Perhaps the Osage chief Big Soldier said it best way back in 1820 when he told a government agent what he thought of white civilization. I see and admire your manner of living. In short, you can do almost what you choose. You whites possess the power of subduing almost every animal to your use. You are surrounded by slaves. Everything about you is in chains, and you are slaves yourselves. I fear that if I should exchange my pursuits for yours, I too should become a slave. When Europeans came to this continent, the indigenous people already had roads. One of them went all the way from Alaska to southern Mexico, and it is now known as the Pan American Highway. These roads crisscrossed America, and they were not just little paths or hunting trails. They were used for an enormous amount of trade, and there were even places to stay alongside these roads. Is that not a sign of civilization? Their fields of corn, beans, and squash were not like those that you see in TV westerns or in the movies. Some little patch of corn the soldiers burned in a few minutes before moving on to the next village. These fields were often huge, and 800 years before Europeans arrived, the irrigation canals for the Hohokam people of southern Arizona were the largest in the world at that time. There were more than 800 miles of canal trunk lines and 100 more miles, or rather hundreds of more miles, of branch lines. Many of these canals were 75 feet across and were lined with clay. This one system could irrigate 10,000 acres, producing so much corn that the Hohokam people exported it, sometimes as far north as Utah. This sounds a lot like civilization. The Europeans who eventually colonized, displaced, and often killed these civilized indigenous people seldom bathed and were shocked that the so-called Indians of the continent often bathed daily, even in freezing weather. It sounds like they were pretty civilized. And yes, they did have durable art made of stone. We Americans are not unlike Robert Scott and Roald Amundsen as they race to reach the prize of being the first to the South Pole. Americans are also on an expedition, but the prize we strive for is to be the country that lives up to the high ideals of its founders. After nearly 250 years, we still haven't made it. Many of our people are suffering terribly, unable to pull the heavy load that an unfair system puts upon them. Perhaps Americans should try something different. There's been a lot of interest in Native American spirituality for many years now, and that is having its effect. It certainly did with me, and I know it also does with our earth-centered UUs. Many Americans don't want anything to do with religion, but they are interested in spirituality. And Native Americans like Niake are being heard. Timeless beliefs such as life must give to life, and the land does not belong to us, we belong to the land. Those are high ideals that can heal people and our country so they can in turn make amends to those we have wronged. So, the people of our nation need to follow that spirituality where it leads. And if they don't, They are guilty of just dabbling in the latest fashion. People who inappropriately appropriate indigenous spirituality while not addressing the fact that their own proud and greedy ancestors stole the continent from the Native Americans. If we don't own that, we can't just borrow their wisdom from them. First, we have to make proper payment. And there are obvious ways to make that payment. First, by honoring them in a way that makes an apology. For example, I think it's safe to say that most of us want to stop claiming the spirit and strength of Native American warriors by naming our sports teams after them. How much sense does that make anyway? We were never on their side. We were never honoring those warriors back when it really mattered. We were killing them, not honoring them. If white Americans are truly interested in honoring Native American cultures, our country can learn from their leadership styles. We can learn from their unselfish forms of socialism, and thereby create a society that gives all impoverished minorities a real chance to prosper and be happy. The people of this country can learn a lot when they're able to stop being proud European Americans or proud Christians or overly proud anything and become proud to just give to life. Thank you.
As long as the sun shall glow, as long as the stream shall flow, as long as the wind shall blow, as long as the grass shall grow, this land shall be in the need. As long as the birds shall sing, as long as the deer shall spring, as long as the whales swimming, as long as their lives shall bring, this land shall be in the need. As long as a baby's small, as long as our children grow tall, as long as our elders recall, as long as this earth shall call, this land shall be indani. Aye, Yahoah, 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 aye, Yahoah.
And thank you to Bonnie, June, and Jennifer for all of our special music this morning. Our closing words are from a Cherokee prayer blessing. May the warm winds of heaven blow softly upon your house. May the Great Spirit bless all who enter there. May your moccasins make happy tracks in many snows. And may the rainbow always touch your shoulder. And let us extinguish our chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Let us go in peace.